Northeast campus, and I want to go through just kind of a quick presentation. I'm not going to go into great detail on each one of these slides, but I'm going to tell you what you need to know going into your next semester. Raise your hand if you've already registered for your spring courses. Whoop, whoop. More than I thought. Fantastic news. If you haven't, I'll show you what to do to get your next class schedule. So now that you are officially a college student, our office, who has advisors, and it also has counselors that are licensed professional counselors, so we can answer any academic questions you have. We do offer private counseling as well with our counselors. We can acclimate you to campus life and how to use campus resources to make the most of your time in the classroom. So the relationship with your advisor is collaborative. So you're kind of bouncing ideas off of each other on the best way to get from point A to point B. So the difference between the different folks that work in our office, career advisors are probably the people you're going to see most often. Those are the ones that are going to help you with your class schedule, make sure you're following the correct degree plan. If you plan on transferring, talk about what courses you can take here to maximize your transfer to your university. Senior advisors, now those are just for those that get in a little bit of academic trouble. So they work with suspension students. How do you get on suspension? Well, if one semester you don't get to a 2.0, then you go on probation. During your probation semester, if you still don't get to that 2.0, then you go on suspension, and that's a headache because there's only 2 senior advisors. They're appointment only, and they make you do an academic plan on what you're going to do to get better grades, and you have to meet with them. They decide what classes you can take and how many. So we want to avoid the senior advisors. And then we have the counselors, which can offer private counseling or community resources as well. So you have many options when it comes to appointments. If you get anything out of today, I encourage you to do an appointment. Right now, when I just left the office, the last person waiting would have been there an hour and 50 minutes waiting to see an advisor. If you have an appointment, you just walk right in and they call your name. If you don't have the time to do in-person appointment, we do phone and we do virtual. Now, a lot of people are freaked out by the virtual because they don't know what that entails. Pretty much the day of your appointment, if you select virtual on your appointment, the advisor is going to email you a link. All you have to do is click on that link to join the virtual room, okay? You don't have to download any apps or create any username or password. You just simply click the link. Did you have a question?
Yes, this side of the room didn't get
Oh,
sorry.
thank you.
Thank you.
So there's many different options. It's really convenient to schedule online either through your Hello TCC. When you log into Hello TCC under prepare to register, it's the very first box. Or you can go to the website here, just tccd.edu, advise me to make that appointment. If you haven't registered for spring, I suggest you do that sooner than later. Classes are filling already, believe it or not. We're not running as many classes in the spring, so to get the schedule you want, the classes you want, I would recommend registering or getting an appointment as soon as possible. Even if that's not a viable option, we do have a chat option through our website where you can chat with an advisor. If you go and type in online advising in the TCC website homepage, it will take you to the chat option where you can chat with an advisor, and they have a little bit more extended hours than on campus. So if you needed those later hours, that's an option as well. So when you come to your appointment, definitely come prepared with whatever questions you have. If you're talking about transfer, make sure you kind of know where you would like to transfer, what you would like to major in. If you don't know that, not a big deal. It's still early on enough to figure that out. The advisor is going to review like your degree plan with you, discuss the classes to take next, make sure you're under the correct degree plan, which is also incredibly important, and I'll talk about different degree plans here in a moment. So pretty much what we're going to talk about is your academic goals, your major, if you're transferring, campus resources if needed, if you're doing developmental coursework, what developmental courses that you need for the upcoming semester, Also addressing very important dates. So one in date that might be really important right now is if you are in a 16-week class, meaning you started August 21st and you're ending December 13th, the drop deadline is November 9th, which is rapidly approaching. So if there's a class you're not doing well in, you would definitely want to kind of make note of that date. And I'll kind of tell you what to do if you have to drop a class. So as mentioned, if you do need developmental still for the following semester, you will be required to enroll in those classes. I know registering for developmentals, especially if it's a co-rec, can be a little bit tricky. So definitely rely heavily on your advisors for help with kind of picking those sections. So as mentioned, if you do need to drop a class, definitely make sure that it's a serious decision. You don't want to just drop a bunch of random classes. Remember that you only get 6 your entire college career, but a W looks better on your transcript than an F. So if you do need to drop a class or it's running to the deadline and you're not sure, definitely make sure you talk to your instructor. Talk to financial aid if you're using financial aid, because it could be that you would owe money back. And then that would definitely be a discussion to have with your advisor too, because it's going to be how can we map you to make up that course in future semesters. Oh, and remember the attendance policy. If you miss more than 15% consecutively over the entire semester, a instructor can drop you for attendance. There are many resources. Unfortunately, I don't think students know of all the different resources that we do have available on campus, but if there's a need, we probably have a resource for it. So here's kind of the list of them. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you're gonna do a little resource too, and like writing center and all of that. So but there's a lot of different resources. Just know that if there's a need, even if you talk to your advisor about it, we can probably point you in the right direction of where to get that need met. What do I want to do? If you don't know that yet, that's not a big deal. We have a lot of new students who don't know what they want to do long term. We have many different career assessments that you can take that would factor in your likes, values, personality, interest, to help maybe come up with some ideas of what you'd want to do. Of course, if you do know, then that's great, because we can even better plan. So the sooner you know, the better. But if you don't know just now, in your first year, there's enough like basic classes that you don't necessarily have to pinpoint a specific career. So how many of you are planning to transfer out to a university? A good portion of you, okay. So if you're planning to transfer, probably the 2 degree plans that you want to be following is either the Associate of Arts, which has absolutely nothing to do with art. It's just a way for you to get your core classes, and the core classes are what you need to transfer. The Associate of Science, again, is a transferable degree, but it's a little bit more limiting. So this would just be specific for people who are going into STEM. With the Associate of Science, it dictates how you can use your electives, which you can only use them for math and science courses. We have a lot of technical degrees here too that are phenomenal degrees. They're called applied science degrees. Most of the time they're not necessarily used for a transfer, and a lot of those classes would not transfer out to a university, but we do have a lot of great technical classes. I know probably our most popular is our nursing program on our Trinity River campus, which is an applied science degree. We have a lot of allied health degree plans. So if you're going into applied science, that's great. Just kind of know that it's a big possibility that those classes won't transfer. If you're not sure what degree plan you're under, or if it's the right degree plan, that's also a great conversation to have with your advisor. We also have certificate programs, which are a little bit shorter, that you can complete as well, such as welding, for example. So how do you decide? Well, I think the career interest inventories are a great way to look at it. Think back of what you wanted to do as a kid, what career you wanted to do as your kid, what do you enjoy, what's your passion, what would you do even if money was not part of the deciding factor. So Career Coach, that's one of the assessments you can take, as well as My Plan. My Plan does require a referral from an advisor, so you can just let them know that you would like to take the My Plan, and then they can get the referral sent over to Career Services, so that you can take that either remotely or in person. Where to locate your degree plan. So in your My TCC track, when you click on progress, it will show all the classes you need for your particular degree plan, and it will also have a progress bar, which I find very helpful. It will show the credits that you've finished, what you're registered for, and what you need to complete. How many credits is an associate's degree? Anyone know? I heard it. 60 credits. Yes, an associate's degree is 60 credits, a bachelor's 120 credits. So I think expectations have probably been covered with you a lot, and I don't want to beat a dead horse, but basically getting involved around in campus, using those resources, advocating for yourself, not procrastinating, getting to know your instructors, all of these are just going to contribute to your success here at TCC. Make sure you're meeting with your advisor, following your degree plan, that you're not taking a bunch of classes that you don't need or are not part of your plan is also just a really good use of your time here. Any questions I can answer for you? Okay, real quick, I do just want to show you one resource that is totally underplayed or not known, and it could probably help solve a lot
You
of.
have to scroll down on that page. Yeah.
Thank you.
So you got it, yeah. It's, yeah. Google's a lot of fun.
Yes. So from our homepage, if you click on academics and you go to the catalog, probably something I reference every single day is the academic calendar. And so it shows all of those important dates. So for spring, you can see that registration opens on the 23rd. It also just lets you know like when those classes are going to start as far as one trimester or their traditional 16 weeks. It also lets you know like when you can drop a class or like what's the deadline, how much of a refund you would get in tuition based on when you drop that class. So this is just a great way to kind of make sure you're staying afloat on those important dates, especially like registration opening and closing. But like I said, the sooner you register, the better. You're gonna have a way better schedule for the spring. All right, well, thank you so much for your time. I hope to see you all in the advising office in the very near future.
All right, so we had a few people walk in a little late. Just make sure you sign this. Okay, we're over here. And then where's Jackson? Sign that. Right, get it. All right, well, thank you very
so
much.
much.
Really appreciate that.
Yes, appreciate your time.
Yes, and the sign sheet, for those of you who kind of walked in a little late, make sure you sign in before you leave today. I'll just leave that up here, and we'll deal with that a little bit later on. Do you want me to bring that sheet to you later, or well, it's only a couple people.
I don't mind reading.
Yeah,
I went
you're
through
good.
it rather quickly.
Yeah, that was good. That was fast.
Record timing.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a presentation yesterday in a 1-hour class, and it was like 25 minutes. It was like,
Yeah, I know with those STSC being an 8-week class, it's just not enough time.
you gotta move very quickly. Yeah. Did you sign this one? Oh, yeah, you did. You did sign it. Thank you. Sign that for me, and I think that is everybody, right? Anybody else not sign it? You all good? Okay. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate you. All right. How is everybody doing today? That good, huh? All right. So, last week, we actually did go over some of these resources on campus, right? We did talk about these. I just want to point out a couple of things about these again before we actually continue on today. I don't know if this is going to work or not. Hey, that'll work, I think. I think that'll be just fine. Yeah. Does that help in the back of the room? Okay, good. So, these resources, I mentioned this last week. These resources, first and foremost, are free. So everybody remember that? And I want to point out, a lot of times it's very difficult to kind of see the benefit if you don't have something to compare it to. So I do want to point out again that these resources on other college or university campuses are not free, or at least not fully free. A lot of these individual resources you can use, but only a set number of times per semester. And then after that, they charge you for them. Okay? How many people in here have actually used one of these resources since last week? Anybody? A few of you. Anybody gone to the writing center or the math lab or the science lab? And I don't mean for the scavenger hunt. I mean like you actually utilize the resource. A few of you. For those of you who went, did you find them helpful? Okay. Yes and no. Getting a mix of different things. Okay. Here's what I would recommend. These resources are here for you to use. And if you want to be successful in college, it's not that I'm saying you have to go to the writing center. But here's what I would recommend you do. If you have an essay that you need to write, if you have a paper that's coming up in an English class or history class, even if you think, I got this, I finished early, it's all good, take it to the writing center and ask them to take a look at it. They're not going to do the editing for you, but they will point out areas that you can improve your paper. And even if that paper is going to get you a B, wouldn't it be better if you spent a little bit of time, use the resource, and get an A instead? Do you see how beneficial that would be? If you're in a math class, and you may not be struggling mightily, but maybe there's a couple of concepts that you probably don't fully grasp, right? Don't just throw up your hands and be like, well, it'll be okay. Go to the math tutoring lab and ask for assistance, okay? There's going to be classes that you're not going to understand 100% of all the material that you're going to be presented with. Use these resources as a stopgap. Make sense? All right, any questions about this before we move on? Now, last week, I think I got to this. I talked about how 75% of people change their majors. Everybody remember that? Okay, and I think I told you all what my major was, didn't I? Does anybody remember what it was? I didn't tell y'all? No? We talked about this stat though, didn't we? Or did we end at this point? I think we ended at the resources, didn't we? All right, well then let's go over the stat. 75% of college students will change their major over the course of their college experience. That's 3 in every 4 students. Now, how many people in here already know what your major is going to be? Like, you know it. You know what you're going to major in. Okay. How many of you have already changed your major since starting college? Anybody? Had a class earlier this week that had like 5 people. So there's a few people in here that are already in this particular demographic. I was in this particular demographic. And when I went to school, anyone want to guess what I went to school to major in first? It's a free guess. What do you want to guess?
Administration.
Administration. No, it's a good guess though. It's close. It's kind of adjacent to that. I went to school to be a business major. Very boring, right? I went to be a business major. My first semester in college as a business major, I went in right after finals to go see my advisor. And I went to talk to my business advisor, and my business advisor sat me down and was going through all these classes, and then he stopped and he looked at me and he goes, "Why do you want to be a business major?" And I'm thinking to myself, boy, that would have been a really good question to ask me maybe 4 months ago, before I already have an entire semester behind me. Well, I answered him. I said, well, I want to be a business major because I want to start my own business. And he told me, point blank to my face, then you don't need a business degree. He goes, more than likely your business is going to fail in the first 2 years anyway. Go get a major in something that you can fall back on when your business fails. Talk about a point blank meeting with an advisor. Now, I have come to find out that the majority of advisors at college campuses do not talk to students like that. My advisor, to be completely honest with you, he was right. Not about the business failing part, but I was spinning my wheels. I was actually going to school thinking that I needed a degree in something that, to be completely honest with you, the degree did not actually satisfy. Does that make sense? You don't need a degree to start a business. Okay? The people who usually get business degrees are people who are in administration. The people who are in the COOs, the upper management kind of individuals. They're not the people who actually just start businesses, the entrepreneurs. So for me, going to school and getting a business degree, it didn't make a whole lot of sense given what, again, we were talking about success. What my vision of success was when I finished college. Does that make sense? Now, anyone want to guess what I changed my major to?
Graphic design.
Graphic design. It's a very good guess. Why'd you guess graphic design?
He's a graphic design teacher.
Because I teach graphic design. And the answer would be no, I didn't get a degree in graphic design. My degree is actually in music education. I know, right? Like half the class is looking at me like, what? Yeah, I get the same look from my colleagues in the faculty. But the point is, my degree is in music education. I switched. Now, does that mean that this statistic, 75%, mean that when people switch their majors, they switch dramatically like that? Like you go in for business and you come out a music educator? Like, no, okay? The vast majority of people that actually change majors, they're going down this path and they just take a slight curve, right? You go in to be a mechanical engineer and you come out an electrical engineer. You're still an engineer. Make sense? Or, hey, I want to major in biology. And you take a bunch of chemistry classes and realize you're really good at chemistry. So you change your degree to chemistry. It's still a science major. You understand? So in this particular case, the point that I want to make with this statistic is, throughout your college experience, don't shy away from the opportunities that you have going to advising and counseling. Don't just show up in your advising appointment and just be like, okay, give me my next set of classes so I can get out of here. Spend some time talking to your advisor. Spend some time talking to your counselor about your experience in your classes. Take some time and talk to the professors in the area that you're trying to major in. If there are certain classes that you take that you tend to like really enjoy, you get up that day and you're like, oh, today's the day where I get to go to fill in the blank. Okay? And the other days you're like, oh, now I have to go to another class of whatever it is. If there's something you really enjoy, something that's really exciting to you, there may be an opportunity for you there to shift your major, especially if it's something that would actually work really well for you. And not only does advising and counseling have the ability to help you out with that, but also career services. I mentioned career services briefly last week, and it was in the slides that she just showed you. Let me explain two things that career services can do for you. If you are one of the people who didn't raise your hand when I asked if you know what your major is, you could go to career services and they have assessments that you can take that will say, well, these are the things that you kind of score really high in. Maybe these are some areas, if there's something here that's really interesting to you, maybe these are kind of the areas that you should focus in. If you already know what you want to do, you can go to career services and they can look up those individual jobs or career markets and say, hey, in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, if you want to be a biology major, here are the jobs that are available. Here's what the pay is, and here's how many open positions there are just around here. That's pretty good information to have, right? And by the way, as an aside, career services also has a professional attire closet for students. You got to go on an interview, you need a suit, you need a nice outfit, you don't have access to one of those things, you can get that at career services. They'll loan you what you need to go on your interview. They will actually help you prepare for your interview if you want as well. And the photography department will take free headshots for you. Anybody ever had to get a headshot done? How much was it? Was it cheap? No. Okay, last time I had to do my headshots, it was like $300 to $400. We'll do it for free. So again, all of these resources that we have on campus, utilize them. Okay? They're there for you. Okay. So today, what we are going to be talking about is we're going to be discussing kind of like this first step into this path of success. We talked about some of the things that are required for success here at college. And the first thing that we need to understand is how we should go about learning. It's a pretty important step, right? But it seems kind of like, really? That seems pretty basic. But here's the issue. A lot of students, to be completely honest with you, don't really know how to properly learn. Now, how many of you, again, were in high school this time last year? Okay. Seems silly for me to stand up here and say a lot of students don't know how to learn after you just spent 12 years slogging it out in K through 12. Can we agree? But hopefully by the end of today, you'll understand what I'm talking about. And to get us started, we're going to talk about the 4 steps in the learning process. Now, the vast majority of students, when we take a look at these 4 steps, usually only center around 1 or 2 of these steps, and that's it. That's the total sum of the learning process that you engaged in throughout your entire career at K through 12. So let me explain. Let's start off with the first one. The first step in any learning process is to prepare. What I mean by that is prepare for class. What do you think preparing for class looks like?
Reading the textbook before you go in.
Okay, in what way? So reading the textbook before you go in. What do you mean by that?
Read the chapter you're about to learn in class.
Okay, why would that help you prepare?
Gives you a basic understanding. Gives you puzzle pieces, and then when you go to class, it fits all the puzzle pieces together.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll come back to that in a minute. What's the other? Note taking. So how does note taking help you prepare before the class?
You can take notes like he was saying, like going through the chapters and kind of.
So like prepare ahead in the lesson and then take notes so that you can actually review those before class. Yeah, both of those are really good answers. How many people in here have actually done that though? A couple people, okay? And a lot of you are looking at me like, no, I've never done that before. If you are in a class where the professor is pretty much going through the textbook in a very linear fashion, like you just got done going through chapters, 7, 8, and 9, well, then you could pretty much be sure that the next couple of chapters you're going to be going through is going to be probably like 10, 11, 12. Makes sense? Before the class begins, if you go ahead and get into that textbook and look through those next couple of chapters. Now, here's one thing I'm going to modify with what you said. You said read. 100%, you got to read it. But here's what I mean by this. You don't necessarily need to read every single word in the chapter for full comprehension. To prepare for class, it could be enough for most people to skim through the chapters to have a general idea, kind of we were talking about the individual puzzle pieces, to have a general idea of what the professor is going to be discussing that day in class. Now, here's an important reason as to why you would want to do that. In order for you to set your mind on what is going to be discussed that day, how many times have you gotten into a class not knowing what in the world the teacher was going to talk about, and it took you a little while to kind of get into the material, right? Sounds familiar to some of you? Versus if before the class even began, if you were able to actually kind of skim through and kind of have a general idea by looking in the textbook, and then when you sat in class and the teacher starts talking about things that now sound more familiar to you, suddenly that allows you to get into that learning mode a lot quicker. Does everybody see that? So, preparing for class requires you, again, we talked about taking responsibility for the learning process last week. You need to take responsibility. Even if the professor doesn't say, hey, I need you to read the next 3 chapters for the next class, do it on your own time. Do it ahead of time. Okay? Prepare ahead in the class. Any questions about that? Nope. Okay. Second step, and this is the step most students kind of just focus on. This is the area that you pretty much have just engaged in your entire 12 years in school, and that is absorbing the information. So let me set the stage and let's see if this sounds familiar to you. You come into class, you sit down in your chair, the teacher gets up and goes, okay, here's what you need to know for the test next week. Let's go over this. And gives you a bunch of information. You may or may not take notes, like you may or may not be taking notes right now. And you just kind of sit there and you kind of absorb what the teacher's actually telling you. And then the next class you come back for the test, you just kind of regurgitate that information and then rinse and repeat for the rest of the year. Sound familiar to you? That's absorbing. Think of it like a sponge, right? You guys have all seen sponges, I'm assuming. When you put a sponge in a bowl of water, what happens to the sponge? Yeah, it soaks up the water. Now, depending on how much water you have in the bowl, can the sponge absorb an infinite amount of water? No, right? There's a limit to how much that sponge can actually take up. Can we agree? Okay, so here's the issue. When we're absorbing information, and that's all that we're doing, we're just absorbing. Okay, there is a limit to how much you can memorize, because that's what we're talking about, memorization. Okay, I don't know about you, but I have a pretty bad memory sometimes. Got a lot of stuff going on. Trying to keep all that straight in my head can sometimes be a bit of a pain. But there is a limit to how much information you can absorb and retain at any one given time. The problem with that is that's not learning, that's memorizing. Learning happens when you absorb the information and go through the other steps we're going to talk about in a minute, and your brain starts to create new neural pathways, allowing you to retain that information more permanently. In that case, it's a sponge that does absorb the information, but the sponge itself can also grow in size, meaning it can absorb even more information. Okay? Most people, when they are in class, they are just a sponge that is one size and one size only. So they get to a certain point of saturation and they can't take any more information unless they get rid of some of the information they've already absorbed. You ever feel like that sometimes? You're sitting in class, you're learning stuff, and you're just kind of memorizing it. A couple days later, you totally forgot what you learned 2 days ago. Right? This is pretty much the step in the learning process most students stop at. And they don't learn how can they actually build those neural pathways. And that can happen in a couple of different ways. One, you're just memorizing stuff just to get through a goal, a test, an exam, a quiz, whatever the case may be. The second thing is that you may be in a class with a teacher who has a teaching style that doesn't align with your learning style. We're going to talk about learning styles here in just a couple of minutes. But either way, just stopping here is going to be a problem. So the third step is to capture the information. So what do you think I mean by capture the information? What thoughts do we have? How would you capture information being presented in class? Any thoughts?
Take a picture of the white.
Okay, right. Has anybody actually taken pictures of like slides and presentations before? Yeah, that's one way. What's another way? What's the more common way to capture information from a class? Write it down in what format? Notes, right? Note taking. All right. Is everyone in here taking notes? All right. Let me ask a question, because we'll talk about notes in depth a little bit later on. How many people in here, when you try to take notes, you try to write down everything the professor actually is telling you? Like you're dictating words. Okay, a couple of people. We'll talk a little bit later on about how, if that's you, you may want to switch to one of the other methods we're talking about, because that can actually cause some problems. How many people, when you actually take notes, it's like bullet points, just like thoughts or ideas, not full-blown concepts, right? Okay. And how many people, when you take notes, you get done for that day, you take your note, you throw it in your bag with your books and your laptop, and there it sits in the bottom of your bag until a couple of days before your test. When you're searching around frantically for those notes that you remember taking at some point in time, and you find, and you pull out of the bottom of the bag, and they look like an accordion. Okay? A lot of people are smiling at me because you know exactly what I'm talking about. Right? Capturing the information. Now, did you capture the information? Yeah, I captured the information. But is it doing you any good? No. Going back to preparing for class, one of the things that you can do with those notes, maybe look them over for notes that you took last class before the next one, just to help refresh your memory about what it is that you talked about in the last class. Make sense? There's another way, though, that you can capture information, and that is you can actually record your professor's lectures. Did you know that that was possible? I have found a lot of students have never realized that you can actually record us. Now, granted, ask your professor first if it's okay. I guarantee you the vast majority of us don't care. That doesn't mean, parade a film crew in the back of the room, right? That's not the type of recording I'm asking for. Now, you could actually, if you've got the capability, just like you're taking photos, if you've got video, that's fine. But everybody has a cell phone, right? Or if you've got a smartphone, I should say it that way. If you have a smartphone, you've got the capability of doing audio recording. Agreed? You've got apps on the phone that can do that. You can actually record your professor's lectures. Now, here's how I do it when I'm taking classes. And yes, even I take classes. I have this audio recorder. You don't have to get this fancy. Okay? This is what I use for media and journalism to actually do interviews with people. But this works just fine, right? I can just put this on the desk, hit record, and it allows me to actually record the lectures. Now, what good does that do me? Well, if I'm able to capture this information later on, the last step in the learning process is to review the information. Which means, at the end of the day, when I'm done with my classes, spend some time reviewing what you captured. Go over your notes. Everybody in here is a commuter, right? I don't want to assume. Does anybody live like walking distance? So everybody has some form of transportation that you have to take. If you use an audio recorder to record your lectures, and you remember that there was a specific lecture that you struggled with, or that there was some information in there that you needed to review, cue it up before you leave and play it back like a podcast. Review the information. Review it before you come back to class the next day. And then in that case, this becomes a cycle, right? You're in class, you're getting the information, you're capturing the information. At the end of the day, you're reviewing the information. And before the next class, you're preparing for that class by reading ahead or reviewing your notes from the last class. You see how that works? Okay. Now, for some of you, I can tell, like, this is nothing new. You kind of do a form of this, and that's fine. But there are many of you that have kind of straightened up and realized there's probably some steps in the learning process that you have been missing out on. Here's my challenge to you for the rest of this week before we meet next week. In the classes that you take, do each of these steps for the next week. Before the class begins, prepare yourself for that class. That means before the teacher actually begins speaking, don't sit there and dead scroll on your phone until they come up here and go, "All right, class, let's get started." Don't do that. Put your phone away, review your notes, maybe look through the chapter, whatever it is. Put yourself in the right mindset, getting ready to absorb the information. As you're absorbing the information, capture the information. Whether that means learning to take notes, if that's not something that you've done before, or whether that means actually recording the professor's lecture on your phone, or if you've got a digital recorder, you can use one of those. I had a student one time use an old tape deck recorder in my class. Yeah, cassette tapes. If you don't know what that is, just Wikipedia it. Anyway, point is, you can get an audio recorder and record the lectures. Whatever the case is, capture the information. After you've done that, spend time that day, later that day, reviewing that information and rinse and repeat the next day. Any questions about this? Yes?
There's been times where I'm taking notes in class and I'm feeling good about it because I'm in there with the teacher, asking questions, taking notes, and then when I go back a day or two later, I open it up and it looks like gibberish, and I can't.
Gibberish is in like you can't read your own handwriting, or gibberish is in like you don't understand the concepts that you wrote down?
Like I can read the handwriting, but what I wrote down doesn't apply to me 2 days later after the class.
Yeah, so if the strategy, the note-taking strategy that you're currently using isn't working well to help make those connections and retain that information after the fact, there are other strategies that you can actually use. And we'll talk about that. I believe next week we'll actually talk about taking notes. Or the week after that. One of these weeks we'll do a deep dive in note-taking. So one of those strategies, highly recommend doing. But in the meantime, I would supplement what you're doing with recording, because then you can go back to that lecture, listen to what was actually said, and that may actually trigger what you actually wrote in the notes. Okay, that may actually make that connection that's missing. All right, any other questions? All right. I really like this particular quote. This is actually from Winston Churchill. Now, so far, I am batting 0 for 3 in classes that know who Winston Churchill was. Does anybody here know who Winston Churchill was? At least 5 people in this class know who. Thank you. At least 6. Okay, you have restored my faith in humanity. Thank you. And history professors. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So, Winston Churchill had this particular quote. Success consists of going from failure to failure without a loss of enthusiasm. How many people agree with this comment? Anybody?
I know it's the right word, but the matchup ain't gonna happen.
Doesn't match up. How many people view failure as a bad thing? Right? How many people love failing? Now, what I mean by failing, I don't necessarily mean like getting a bad grade at the end of the school year and failing a class. I just mean failing like you don't understand a concept, or there's a specific skill that you haven't been able to actually grasp, right? Or a process that you haven't been able to make work. Failure happens. Has everybody in here at least failed once? So we all know what failure is like. Can we agree? Okay, yes. Even your professors fail. A lot. Okay, again, we are human. Now, here's the thing. Failure is not a negative. It's an opportunity. Failure only becomes a negative when this second part of the quote becomes false. Failure only becomes negative when you quit, when you stop, when you give up. You ever get to that point? Trying to learn to do something, it's not working out, and you just throw up your hands, you're like, I can't do it, never mind, and you walk away and you never come back to it ever again. But how many times have you actually tried to do something that you felt, in your heart, you were really wanting to succeed, and you failed at it the first time, but you didn't walk away, and you persisted, and you kept doing it over and over again until you got it right? Have you ever had that experience before? Could be a video game you were trying to beat. Could be something you were trying to learn how to cook. Could be a new skill, like, hey, I was trying to learn carpentry or woodworking or welding or whatever the case may be, and you failed at it the first 100 times, but you persevered because you had the enthusiasm, more importantly, the motivation to continue until you found success. You ever had that happen to you before? Okay. Failure is, in fact, the best teacher. I totally agree with that comment. It is the best teacher. Some of my best, most successful students were not ones who got into class and got everything on day one. They weren't the ones who sat down and were just making straight A's across the board. They were the ones that struggled at first. They were the ones that needed help. They were the ones that were utilizing some of the resources we talked about before. But they were also the ones that did not lack enthusiasm. They had a goal, they had an idea as far as what success meant for them. And they didn't allow failure to stop their enthusiasm. They learned from their failure, and they were able to persevere. And a lot of them are in jobs now that are amazing. These people are leaders in their own industry. They didn't sit down and immediately get it on day one. They had to work for it. Remember, we talked about what success looks like. One of those things is you got to put in the work, and this is part of it. Any questions? All right, so let's talk about learning styles, and then we will actually wrap up for today. Sound good? I mean, we can go to 4:30 if you guys want. No, suddenly now I get a lecture notes. No. All right, I swear I'm going to bring caffeine for this class. You guys got to get up. Let's talk about learning styles. Now, everybody in here learns differently. Can we agree with that statement? Okay. Now, I'll be honest with you. I was kind of surprised first time I started talking about this. There are a lot of people who walk around life and they think that everybody else around them learns the exact same way as they do. Believe it or not, that's not true. Okay? Everyone learns differently. We are going to learn 4 specific learning types today. They are defined using this ridiculous acronym called VARK, V-A-R-K. So each one of those letters denotes one of the learning types. As I go through these, here's what I want you to do. I want you to think about how you have learned in class before. Think about the classes that you were just sailing through. You were getting it. The teachers came in and they were telling you information and it just clicked. Everything was great. Or it doesn't have to be in class. Maybe it could be something that you were trying to learn outside of school. Right? It could be a sport that you were trying to do and there was a specific coach and just for whatever reason you clicked with the way that coach was teaching. Whatever the case may be, I want you to think about those periods in your life as I go through these 4 individual learning types. Because what we're going to find out, most people aren't just one learning type, they're kind of a mix of these 4. But what we're going to find out is that because everybody learns differently, you are probably going to find yourself in a situation in college where you will be paired up with a teacher that doesn't fit your specific learning type. And then what do? You just fail the class? You just struggle quietly inside? What do? Well, there's specific tools that we'll talk about to kind of get through that. The first learning style is the visual learning style. What do you think I mean by visual? Any ideas?
Demonstration.
What do you mean?
Like just writing down examples and explaining what you're writing.
Yeah, so let's imagine for a moment that you're in a math class, right? And you have a professor that uses the whiteboard. And they are going through how to solve an equation step by step on the whiteboard, right? Versus a professor who has it already solved before you walk into class. They're like, all right, this is how you're going to solve the equation. And he just explains how to solve it. Do you see the 2 different approaches? One approach, he's visually showing step-by-step processes. The other one, he has it already solved before you come in and he's just telling you how he's solving it. That hits 2 different learning types. The visual learner will grasp the concept a lot easier if they are shown how it's done. My wife is a great example of this. She's the type of person that if she could sit down and she could see how something is done, she's got it. But if I try to tell her how to do something, good luck. It won't sink in. I don't care how many times you actually do this. So, visual learners, how many of you in here have ever gone to YouTube to learn how to do something? Okay? Don't be shy, I know. There are going to be a lot more hands going up for the end of this. YouTube is a great way to learn how to do something, depending on how the tutorial is actually shown. There are tutorials out there that will show how to do something without narrating. Visual learners pick up on that, right? It doesn't matter if the person's actually explaining what they're doing. As long as I can see how it's done, I can replicate it. That's a visual learner, right? But imagine for a moment a visual learner being stuck in a class that's all lecture. There are no visual aids. What do you do then? We'll talk about that later. Second learning type, auditory. What do you think this one is? Yeah, this is, you're just hearing it, right? If somebody can tell you how to do something, you got it. This is me. I'm auditory. I'm the type of person who can go into a lecture class, sit in the back, not really taking any notes. By the way, I don't recommend doing that. And as long as it's a lecture class and what they're lecturing on is what I'm going to be asked to actually replicate, I can handle it. If I watch a YouTube video and it's just somebody doing it and not explaining what they're doing, I'm lost. I can't do it. But if the person is doing it and narrating what they are doing at the same time, it doesn't matter if they mess up showing me a step. If I hear what they're doing, I got it. I can do it just fine. But what happens if someone who's auditory gets into a class and the professor's like, all right, I need you to go home tonight and read the next 10 chapters of your book. What do? Again, right? Think about these things. Third learning type, reading. Now, for a long time, we thought readers and visual learners were one and the same. They're not, okay? Those are two totally different skills. Can we agree? Readers, in my last example, going into a class and the professor goes, I need you to go home, read the next 10 chapters. The readers are like, yes, great, right? They're the type of people that if you get in the class and you're like, hey, if this textbook is everything that I need to know, I'll just read this thing cover to cover, I'll be good. But what happens to a reader if they're in a class that's all lecture-based? Now, the auditory learners are going to be happy. But the readers, on the other hand, they struggle. Do you see this? Have you ever found yourself in a class before and you've struggled with retaining that information, but there are other people in the class that just seem to get it? Seems frustrating, doesn't it? First off, stop comparing yourself to other people. Everybody learns differently. The issue is probably not, I won't speak for all my colleagues, it's probably not the actual instructor, right, or the material being presented. It's just that the teacher doesn't have a learning style or a teaching style that matches your learning style. Does that make sense? Last is kinesthetic. Anyone understand or know what kinesthetic is?
Hands-on approach.
Yeah, very much hands-on approach. This describes my son. I'll give you an example. My son is a mixture of visual and kinesthetic. He has to do it. His issue is that he actually has a condition called orthographic processing, which is kind of under the umbrella now of what's called dyslexia. Have you ever seen what dyslexia is? Like you kind of jumble up. Anyone seen Percy Jackson? So I see. Okay. So that reference actually hit. Thank you. Right? So dyslexia is where the letters kind of get jumbled up. In his case, though, the orthographic processing is a little bit more. It's kind of a disconnect between what he is seeing or what he is hearing and what he is processing. So it affects not just the visual as far as reading goes, but it also affects auditory. Okay? I can tell him something, and I guarantee you if I asked him to repeat back to me, he would get something wrong in it. Because what he processes auditory and reading is different. Okay? So a good example of this. He wanted to join the band. He wanted to play a musical instrument. Now, I told you, my degree is music education. My wife is also a music educator. She plays flute. I play saxophone. We have tons of flutes and saxophones in our house, right? So we thought, great, pick one of those, we'll be set. He didn't want to play either one of those instruments. And for a while, we were trying to figure out why. He's like, no, I really, really like the saxophone. I really, really do like the flute, but I really just don't think it's for me. And for a while, we were trying to figure out why that was, because what he ended up picking was trumpet. Have you seen a trumpet before? Here's what we discovered. He was going on YouTube, watching musicians play. He would look at saxophone players. Now, if you've ever seen a saxophone player, it takes both hands to play saxophone, right? And you have to have both hands working together to make the saxophone work. Same thing with the flute. If you don't believe me, go watch Anchorman. There's a terrific scene with Will Ferrell playing a flute. But you have to have both hands working together to make it work. What he was doing was he was going on YouTube and he was watching these videos and he was trying to visually, remember it's not reading or auditory, he was trying to visually pick up what people were doing on these instruments and taking them and trying to put those into practice with the actual saxophone or the flute that we were trying to get him to play, and he wasn't able to get it. But when he picked up a trumpet, which only has 3 valves and 3 fingers, when he watched a trumpet player play on YouTube, he was able to immediately pick up a trumpet and play it. Like that. He was able to mimic what he saw on that trumpet because all he had to deal with were 3 fingers. And by him actually doing it, he was able to actually gain that skill. Do you see how the different learning type works? For him, reading is a struggle. He works on it. He's in the process of reading through Harry Potter right now. Reading's a struggle for him. Auditory is a struggle for him. But if he can see it and he can do it, he's got it down. But what happens if you're a kinesthetic learner and you're in a class that requires a lot of reading? Or you're in a class that has a lot of lectures? What do you do? How do you handle something like that? Now, question. How many of you identify with one of these 4 learning types? How many of you identify primarily as a visual learner? How many think primarily auditory? It's usually less auditory. How many are readers? A couple. How many are kinesthetic? Like, you got to do it, hands on. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. I want you to think about these 4 learning types. And again, most people are a mixture of these 4. It's not like a pure reader or a pure visual learner. It's usually a mixture. I want you to think about these as you kind of work through class over the next week. When we come back next week, we're going to go through some various tips and techniques to kind of help you out with this, because we're going to talk about the brain. How does the brain actually function? Okay? We're going to discuss this. Any questions? All right, let's talk about your assignment for a moment. I'm assigning to y'all assignment number 2, which is SMART goals. I want each and every one of you to come up with 3 goals. By the way, this slide will be on Canvas. Okay? So don't worry about it. You don't have to take a photo of it. It'll be up on Canvas as a PDF. I want you to come up with 3 goals for your educational journey. 3 goals. Now, those goals have to fit under this acronym of SMART. So there are 5 criteria that your goals have to have. They have to be a specific goal. So in other words, don't just say, I want to do better in class. Great. It's not very specific. Okay? It has to be specific. It has to be measurable. In other words, you have to be able to look back at your goal and know, yes, in fact, I have met my goal. I'll give you an example. Let's say your goal is, I want to work to be better at taking tests. Right? I want to work to lower my anxiety when I take tests. Okay, great. How would you go about measuring something like that? Okay, think about that question. Or how about this? I want to be better at taking notes. Well, what does better mean? How would you define better? Does better mean maybe I want to make sure that I write at least a half a page of notes in every class? Well, that's certainly something you can look back and measure. Agreed? Right? Or maybe I want to be better, I want to take better notes by using one of fill in the blank strategies, maybe an outline strategy. I want to get better at taking outline strategies, and I want to make sure that I do a proper outline in my notes for every class that I take. Bless you. That's something that you can look back and you can measure and you can say, yes, I have done that, or no, I have not. Does measurable make sense? It has to be achievable. Okay? You may have a goal, I want to graduate, get a job, and become the next Elon Musk and make $1 billion. Okay? Fantastic goal. I wish you all the luck in the world. But for this particular class, let's scale that back just a little bit. Okay? Make sure that it's an achievable goal. For instance, don't say something like, I want to be able to learn how to write an essay, a 5-page essay in 3 days. Do you feel comfortable being able to achieve that goal? Probably not, right? It's going to take a little more time than that. Make it achievable. Make it relatable. You may have a goal of like getting healthier. Well, that's fine, but how does that relate to your education? Make sense? Finally, it has to have some sort of time component. So you may have a goal of saying like, I want to take better notes by making sure that my notes are at least a half a page long. Well, that's great, but when are you going to do this? At what time are you going to try for this goal? So then you may want to add a time component. Say, okay, every class that I take, I'm going to take better notes by making sure that I write at least a half a page. Okay, so when you're doing it every day. So a couple of quick examples of what I'm talking about. So imagine we are wanting to write an essay. Okay, we're in a 16-week class. You're in a history class. The history teacher comes in and goes, all right, first week of class, just letting you know, by the end of this semester, each and every one of you will have to have a 10-page paper written on our subject this semester, which will be whatever. Great woolly mammoth migration of North America circa 5000 BC. I don't know if that's a real thing. I just made that up. But point is, you're going to have to write a 10-page paper. Well, here's a goal for somebody who maybe wants to work on writing papers and be better at it. I will complete one section each week. So one section of the paper each week. Okay, there's time-based. For 12 weeks. Then I'm going to dedicate weeks 13 and 14 to editing so I can complete the paper by week 15. So in a 16-week class, my goal is I'm going to be done with this paper, fully edited, ready to turn in a week before it's due. Do you see how that goal works? Is it specific? Absolutely. Can you measure week by week success in this goal? Yeah. Have I done a section? Yes. Good. No. Bad. Do your section. Right? Is it achievable? I think breaking it up this way would make it achievable. Agreed? It's certainly relatable. Has to do with your education. And there is a time component. Any questions about this? So your assignment this week, I want you to think about and come up with 3 goals. Now, I don't want you to go home tonight and immediately come up with 3 goals. I want you to think about them. Here's what I mean by that. Let me clarify. Think about areas in education that you know you need to work on. Right? You know you better than I know you. You know what you need to work on. Think about 3 areas that you want to focus to be better. And I want you to just generally come up with a rough draft. It doesn't have to be a page long for each goal. It could be a sentence like this. Okay? I want you to come up with 3 individual goals that hit all 5 of these SMART measurable topics. Okay? Has to be specific, has to be measurable, has to be achievable, has to be relatable, and it has to have a time component. Come up with 3 of them. Now, as far as how you're going to turn that into me, if you feel comfortable writing it on a piece of paper, I will take a hard copy. However, before you turn that into me next week, take a picture of it, because we're going to use and tweak these goals over the next few weeks. Make sense? If you would rather type it out on a laptop or a tablet, or even a cell phone, that's fine. You can turn in a digital copy through Canvas. Okay? So how many goals do you need to have by next week? 3. Okay? Not 1, not 2, not 5, but 3. Okay? I had somebody one time try to come up with like 20 goals. Don't do this. Just do 3. Okay? Any questions about this? All right, so in just a minute, I'm going to dismiss class. I will make assignment 2 live on Canvas. Okay, it's going to be due next week. I will post a PDF of that this slide, as well as all the slides from last week and this week on Canvas. All right? Any questions? All right. Before you leave, if you didn't sign in the attendance sheet, please do so. And I will see everybody next week.